Thank you for joining us. I'm Gord Long. I have with me today Mish Shedlock of Sitka Pacific Capital and mishtalk.com. Welcome back.
Pleasure to be back on.
Quickly the month goes and flies by, but this month we're going to talk about Brexit again. You warned us last month. Mish, you've written a lot on Brexit, and since the vote, what should our viewers, listeners that haven't been following really know and distill from it?
Well, the key takeaway here is one simple thing: the voters are fed up. Period. And that is the message. Actually, that's the message. That's the same thing that won Trump the nomination. It's the same thing that has Marine Le Pen, a pretty right-wing, anti-Euro, anti-EU person in first place in French polls. It's behind the vote in Austria. We're going to have another election there, actually, in Austria. The court annulled the first round. They didn't use the word fraud, but there were some irregularities in counting votes. The right-wing candidate that won on an anti-immigration platform, he was ahead until the postal votes were counted, and that's where the irregularities were, so much so that the Constitutional Court of Austria said, you know what, we're going to do this election over. So we'll see who wins that one. But voters literally are angry. Oh my gosh, yes, how can I forget about Italy? The Beppe Grillo's party is in first place there. He wants to get Italy off the euro. The Italian banks are in horrific shape. Matteo Renzi is battling now Chancellor Merkel over bailouts of Italian banks. What's interesting about this, the number keeps floating around. Sometimes you hear 200 billion euros, sometimes you hear 350, sometimes you hear 400. Can't remember if it was Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley. Someone came out and said, well, the number might be higher, which of course wouldn't surprise you or me at all. So, and what's unique about Italy is that it's a lot of individual investors, mom and pop, small businesses, individual people bought bank bonds. And they are going to be, under EU rules, the first to be bailed in. They can literally lose everything. Italy saw 2 suicides back in December when people were bailed in on tiny banks. Now we're talking about the 3rd largest bank in Italy and the oldest bank in the entire world, dating back to the 1500s, 1400s, being insolvent. Actually, the whole system's insolvent, so we're pretending that it's only this, select set of banks. So a lot going on. Voters are angry literally everywhere. And in the UK, it was fear and anger over Merkel's immigration policy that caused people to vote out. So anger, that's the word.
In Europe, the anger to me is with the refugees and the problems it's creating in all of the societies, and sexual harassment, and we can go on in cases after case there. There are actually people, and I have relatives there, are afraid, and they're frustrated that the government's doing nothing about it. And that and it's a consistent pattern. It's taking people right to the end. And as you say, it's not just Europe, it's not just UK. It's not just the United States, it's the establishment around the world, it seems to be. And I sense a social unrest that's beginning here in America. Are you sensing the same thing?
Oh, well, that's what's behind the rise of Trump, without a doubt. That explains the popularity of a socialist, Bernie Sanders. That explains why, this is really curious, Clinton, Sanders, and Trump are all against the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership. And I wrote about that today, too. The whole thing is, it's not about free trade. Nothing to do with free trade. If anything takes 5,000 pages, 5,544, I think was the number, cannot possibly be about free trade. Free trade would fit on a napkin, effective immediately. We end all subsidies and all tariffs. That's all free trade. That's what free trade is. It shouldn't take 5,000 pages. I read an analysis last year that said that only 5 out of 29 chapters had anything to do with trade at all. There's global warming nonsense in there. There's all kinds of legalese in there. There's actually 30 chapters. I went and looked it up today. So maybe they added another chapter in there somewhere. But it's not about free trade. And people are angry because they're not benefiting. The median wages household income, is worse now than it was in 1973. We've gone nowhere.
I had Alan Brown on, and we discussed in detail what is known of the TTIP. And you're so right, Mish. But people aren't even allowed to see it. Even the politicians in Europe have to go into locked rooms. They can't take it out of the room. What kind of open society do we have? But what Wikipedia has leaked a number of parts of it, and it's basically there's parts in it where it's for the corporations by the corporations. And if for example, I'll just give you an example and ask you to comment. If a corporation, if a bill is passed, a law anywhere in the country, and a corporation's profits are impacted, they have the right to sue the government for those lost profits.
Yeah, absolutely crazy to pass anything like that.
Every company is going to be going, but how's that settled?
The cigarette companies, the alcohol company, everyone. Anyways, they put a restriction on an ad on a pack of cigarettes. Philip Morris is going to go after Australia, boom, saying, hey, you cut into my profits because of this.
Exactly right. But then how it's arbitrated is, it goes to an arbitration committee that the corporations appoint people to.
Yes.
There's no politicians or no elected people on it. It's a giant kangaroo court. You get into things, all the green policies in Europe, the people are so mad about. Green policies they've spent years putting into legislation, GMOs, etc., disappear. So you can imagine in Europe how they would feel about that. I'm not trying to take a position. I'm just it's not about what the people want or what the people perceive they want.
If it takes 5,000 pages, it's not about free trade, period. And that is the aspect that you mentioned, and I mentioned it today actually, is the worst aspect of the agreement, without a doubt. And it should not pass for that reason. Now, what's ironic is we've got scores of people who are against it because it's too much free trade, and I'm against it because it has nothing to do with free trade at all.
How much of this, in terms of the social unrest, is spilling from Brexit? I don't see it's spilling from Brexit.
Brexit's a symptom. Brexit's not a cause. The Brexit is a symptom. It's a symptom. Back what I said of and I'll have to get you a slide on this. I have one of real household income below where it was in 1973. Now, actually, we have the top 5% have done really, really well. The top 20% have done well. The bottom 80% of the people have done poorly. And this all started 1971 when Nixon took the U.S. off the gold standard. I have all these charts dating back to the same point. You had an explosion in CEO pay, explosion in credit, explosion in corporate profits. All of this all started at the same time, and the anger now that people have, they're not blaming the Fed, they're not blaming the public unions, they're blaming free trade, when in fact we started losing manufacturing jobs long before NAFTA, long before we worked out, long before China came into the picture. Manufacturing jobs have been on a decline simply because of increased productivity. They weren't called robots back then, but that's really what it's all about. The number of people it takes to build a car, a truck, a plane, anything is dramatically lower. But people see this and they're pointing the finger at NAFTA. When this all started, well before any of these agreements happened.
We seem to be on a razor's edge right around the world. Let's talk about right here at home in America. I was walking into a grocery store the other day, and I noticed the flagpole was at half mast, and immediately went through my mind, where was it? It was Dallas, the shooting in Dallas of the 5 police officers. But what hit me was I was looking at the flagpole, and I've been doing it consistently without knowing it, and it was always at half mast for the last year, and it was like, and I was thinking about what it was, and it suddenly hit me. It's always at half mast. And I can't remember walking in the store in a year where it wasn't at half mast. That's the change that's happening in America. I'm not exaggerating on that. It hit me like a ton of bricks. It's so consistent.
Yeah, and the politicians don't get it because they're in the wealthy class. They're the ones that benefit. They write special deals from them. They're exempt from Obamacare. They're exempt from rules and regulations. They're exempt from insider trading. They've exempted themselves from everything, and they live in their own isolated world, and they just don't get it. And all of this fear mongering over Brexit, it's all over nothing. These warnings, the UK wouldn't be able to work out deals with anyone. President Obama came on and he said back in April that Great Britain's going to be in back of the queue, and he repeated that in June, the day of Brexit. He said, "Well, okay, I'll have you know they're in back of the queue." Guess what? 1 week later, that's all it took. There's a deal in U.S. Congress on trade between the U.S. and the UK. And guess what? These deals are a lot easier to work out one-on-one because you get 27 nations in the EU that all have to agree to something before anyone can sign it. They can come up with an agreement, but they all have to ratify it. That's the way the stupid damn thing works. So it takes 6, 7, 8 years for the EU to agree on a deal with anyone because every nation in there has to ratify everything. Every time a nation joins the EU, it increases the length of time it takes for anything to get done. You can't change anything without every nation agreeing to the change. Quite a ridiculous setup. And the EU is nothing about free trade. You look at the carve-outs that they have for France on agriculture. Everyone in Europe pays more for agricultural goods just to protect inefficient French farms, to save the small French farmer. Everyone in Europe has to pay more for goods. Great Britain finally had enough of that. The catalyst was migration. But some of these other things were on the UK's mind as well. And then we had all of these warnings. They were so funny, from Francois Hollande in France and Jean-Claude Juncker, the head of the European Commission, all issuing warnings that the UK was still going to have to abide by the migration rules of the EU if they wanted to work out any trade agreement. Don't these arrogant fools, and Merkel included on this, realize this is why the UK left? And then if you look at bilateral trade, the UK has most of its trade with the rest of the world. The UK runs a huge trade deficit with Europe, especially with Germany. All the UK has to do is come by and say, you know what? Let's not import all these cars from France and let's put a huge tariff on cars from Germany. You know, I'm a free trade advocate, so but these guys aren't. You know, they believe in fair trade, and if one's going to hold a hammer to one's head, you know, this is what you do. You put a stick, you poke them right in the eye. You know, they think this thing's going to be one-sided. Well, it might be. And it'll be one-sided in favor of the UK because the UK has the upper hand in these negotiations just because of the bilateral balance of trade the way it is.
Mish, nobody covers the landscape, the macro landscape, more thoroughly and more detail every day than you. What's your crystal ball telling you where we're headed? What we should be seeing and expecting over the next year or 2 years?
Well, one thing I'm watching closely is gold and silver, and gold was even down, you know, today, and I'm looking at a number of miners, and they were up, and it used to be last year, every little pullback in gold, miners would get hammered, just crucified. You know, they were literally priced at liquidation values, at below book values in late December, early January. Now we're seeing something completely different. We're seeing a big bid for gold and a big bid for miners. And, you know, even though the stock market's rising now, I just still sit in awe of this. Certainly the stock market got advanced way more than I didn't think it would get beyond 1,500, and here we are, you know, over 500 points higher on the S&P. So I've certainly not gotten that right, but we are seeing a bid behind gold, and I believe it's because people are increasingly questioning whether or not central banks have things under control. Gold started its decline from 1900 all the way down to 1,000, near 1,000, when Mario Draghi, ECB President Mario Draghi, came out and said, "We will do whatever it takes, and believe me, it'll be enough." You know, everyone had this renewed faith in central banks having things under control. Then we've seen a lot of reasons to not believe that. The crisis in banking crisis in Italy, the what's going on in France, Brexit. You know, these things are beyond central banks' ability here to fix, and I think that's what we're seeing. I think that's the message here in gold.
So with Kuroda, or rather Bernanke, flying over to meet with Kuroda, the head of the Bank of Japan, and suddenly out of that, we've got rumors that we've got $100 billion of helicopter money coming on the fiscal side and more monetary stimulus. Everybody said, and that moved the market because it says more free money. Comments there?
Yeah, the John Walden had an excellent quote a few years back. Japan is a bug in search of a windshield, and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is determined for that bug to smack into that windshield. So I think there's another leg down in the yen coming, and it's likely going to start. I mean, here's a man hell bent on producing inflation, and I did a post on this last week. It was so ridiculous. He actually thought that raising taxes would get people to go out and buy things. His theory was, well, right before taxes go up, everyone's got to rush out and buy. Well, even if that was true, Gordon, purchases would collapse immediately after. But you know, that was one of the arrows of his policy, and he's already had to back off on that. And you know, we've gone through this for 3 decades. 3 decades. And these guys just don't get it. They're trying what hasn't worked for 30 years in expectation it's going to work. Quite amazing.
And it seems to be they have one, well, as my father used to say, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so the only thing they keep doing is they know how to print more money or try and push liquidity out. But I think the bigger problem is going to be central banks can fix liquidity. They can't fix solvency. And I think the bigger issue is solvency. When I look at non-performing loans and now the ability to roll it over with credit, the credit cycle having reversed, is there an issue there?
Yeah, to me, that's the big deflation issue here. When credit starts to unwind, the value of credit on the books of banks, I think that's what we're seeing here in the plunge of bank shares, not just in Italy, but Deutsche Bank, is just the banks have been collapsing all year. So it's really hard to say. You look at some of these values and the notational values on the huge numbers of trillions of dollars worth of derivatives. How much of that is really at risk and balanced and offset? I don't know, but certainly there's counterparty risk. If they've got this risk on one side that's supposedly offset by another side, well, guess what? It's not really offset if one side can't pay. So that's what we're going to see. How much of that is at risk? I don't know. Certainly, we do know the market is very, very worried about it.
Deutsche Bank's down 65% thereabouts. We're liable to see single digits. And I remember Lehman going under at ratios of 32 to 1. Deutsche Bank's officially 50-55, and we all know it's well north of that. I saw Enron fold on derivatives, and they pale in comparison to Deutsche Bank's books. I saw Bear Stearns go under on mortgages, and I look at the amount of loans that that Deutsche Bank has, never mind underlying the Target 2 without the Bundesbank. It seems there's a problem there.
It is, and it's not just Italy. It's not just Germany. Huge underperforming loans in Spain. Who was it? Actually, was it not the CEO of Deutsche Bank, but top ranking economist at Deutsche Bank is calling for 350, was it 350 or 150 billion euro bailout? If that's what they're calling for, how big is the problem really? So it's massive. And I don't think Deutsche Bank is doing this because it's concerned about Italy. It's concerned about Deutsche Bank.
Right, Unicredit. It's. I didn't mean to pick on Deutsche Bank. It's broad based, but it's so blatant. Switching gears slightly, Mish, because of time. Labor numbers. Boy, one time 30,000. Next time off there. We always know they're volatile, but they seem to be politically motivated to an excess now. They always seem to create the right story for the narrative is trying to be created.
Well, there's certainly a story behind it, but I'm wondering there was a strike, and then the strike was off. But if we look at those numbers, I mean, just average the two. First off, we reported 32,000. I believe they downgraded that to 12,000. So then the next month it rises, 187,000, something like. If you take those 2 months and average them, maybe you're on the right track here, but maybe not. Because I looked at the household survey, and we've seen these divergences before, and I've commented on them before, and I keep expecting that one of these times the household survey, which generally has been like worse than the other one, is just going to take hold. And the household survey numbers have actually been bad for 4 consecutive months here. Meanwhile, we've got this volatility in the establishment survey. So is the establishment survey right? Is the household survey right? How should we look at this? We've got this divergence, and I think we need to see another month or two of the establishment survey and of the household survey. Maybe the household survey recovers here. That's been the pattern, but maybe we're on a new trend. Maybe the establishment survey, because of all the way they count all these part-time jobs, is just totally messed up. I was in and an example of that. It just like really hit me. I was in Crested Butte, Colorado. Had a great trip there last week. Love the place. Beautiful little town. But we went to these different restaurants every night, and it was kind of interesting. The cook at one restaurant was the guard to get into the bar the next night, and was a waiter a third night. All of these people, we had I had servers, the same server at three different restaurants one time. What's going on here? What's going on is obvious. These people are all working multiple jobs and are all being triple counted because these companies don't want to hire them full time and pay Obamacare full-time benefits. So I saw it. I mean, same person was a cook, a server, and the guy that carded you, whatever you call it, the gate person at a bar. So and I'm sitting there thinking, well, okay, is this really just Crested Butte, Montana, or is this all of the United States? So I don't know, Gordon, but certainly it's beyond just Crested Butte.
I was in discussions here recently with a group that was in nursing homes up in New England, and they were complaining about inability to keep staff. And the problem they have, these are 24/7 operations. All the workers have 2 and 3 jobs, so they're working multiple shifts at other homes. So when they have to keep them over because somebody doesn't show up, they can't. The people, but they can't live on one salary, and the hours are all down where they're on part-time work. They won't take them up to full-time work, and it's crippling the industry. So it's not an uncommon problem across the United States. We've talked about that before. Last point though, is we always talk about Chicago and Illinois and the problems, but you wrote an article and it said every 5 minutes somebody is leaving Illinois right now.
Yeah, credit for that goes to Mike Lucy, Director of Policy at the Illinois Policy Institute. I'm a senior fellow at the Illinois Policy Institute. They use a lot of my stuff. I'm starting to use some of their stuff, and that was really an excellent article. But people think, well, it's just people retiring. People retire and get out. No, he did a study, and actually the people leaving the most are the millennials, and those just a little bit older. So and certainly there is a portion of those retiring want out, but it's not just retirement. Illinois is a sad environment. Property taxes here are totally out of this world. On my house here, it's $14,000 a year or something like that on maybe a $600,000 home. That's crazy. You don't own your own home in Illinois. Taxes are crazy.
What's happening is federal and state can't move off federal income tax, state sales taxes, property taxes is the leverage, and as they cut all the payments down, the local towns are getting stretched. They didn't do pension planning tight enough, and the only recourse is property taxes, and they're just going up. And now they're gobbling up everybody's Social Security check. Their Social Security checks are going in New England to pay for their property taxes because they went up so dramatically. And we have some restrictions in Massachusetts. And it's fees. I had my license renewed the other day. I was stunned at what I had to pay just for a 5-year renewal, but it wasn't maybe I can afford it. I looked around this room and I waited for 2 hours just to go in, give my money, and leave. People in there didn't have $50, Mish. It was obvious. $50 to most of the people in there meant eating this week. They're on food stamps and just barely by, but they got to be in there paying their $50. And so these fees and everything that's coming out, the taxes are going up at a significant rate. You're obviously seeing it in Illinois.
Yeah, and we'll have to keep an eye on those exit numbers in Illinois, especially Cook County, because Mayor Rahm Emanuel already passed the largest property tax hike in the history of Illinois last year. And he's talking about raising taxes again just to bail out the pension plans that are 30% funded. It's really a crime. The solution is, without a doubt, bankruptcy. The Chicago public school system is bankrupt, period. All that needs to happen is recognition of that fact, but it's not even possible for them to declare bankruptcy because Illinois doesn't allow it.
In closing, Mish, any key messages you want to leave with our listeners this month?
No, everyone's waiting for a pullback here in gold, I guess, and we see it. Everyone's calling for it. Even the gold bugs are calling for it. And I wonder if gold needs to get much higher or before we see this correction. I don't know. I bought at an inopportune time, actually, a couple of years ago, but I added on the way down. So I'm actually ahead on that position. I wrote a post, Mish buys a basket of miners, and I was mocked for that. But every one of the actually bought like 10 or 12, 15 positions. I can't remember. All but one are in the green now. Certainly I could have done better by buying in January, but everything's 2020 here, isn't it? I didn't expect gold to go as low as it did. It's been on a tear straight up. And with everyone calling for a pullback, it doesn't matter to me because I'm just going to hold on to these positions until I think they're fully valued. But maybe we don't see it. A friend of mine on the Motley Fool in 2000 said something to me one time. He said, a market that lets you in is not one you want in. So we'll see if that holds true here for gold. I don't know.
The only thing moving faster than gold is silver, by the way.
Yes, silver's doing very well.
Talking to the group at Incrementum here today, they put out in Gold We Trust the definitive work, 150 pages annually on the gold industry and what's going on. And they're very aggressive what they think is going to happen, but they also told me they're buying silver. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, that was interesting. But they think they're both, but they think it'll outperform it. At least that's what they said. We've got a break. I know next month we'll have a whole different subject area to talk to as usual. I hope you're going to take some vacation again, besides the one you took.
Absolutely. Actually, I'm going to the Grand Canyon in a week. So the North Rim. I've been to the South Rim many times. Going to go to a place called Cedar Breaks National Monument. It's very like Bryce Canyon, for anyone that's familiar with that in Utah. So yeah, I love to get in travels, and the beauty of what I do here, Gordon, is all I need is an internet connection to do my job.
Well, you bring back one great picture, one of your award-winning photos, and we'll hold it up to the screen like we've done before.
Okay, we'll do that. I've got some good ones from Crested Butte.
Talk to you again. Bye.